All right, we are back for another week of family dinner. Here we are to carry on our juicy conversations of our family dynamics and our relationships that we have with each other, with our mom. Today, we're going to talk about a little bit about secure attachment, our own secure attachment with with our parents, and then kind of go into reparenting and that type of work that we do on our own, and then how we parent our own children, and so all that is part of our conversation today. Jump into it. Reparenting, right, is giving yourself what you thought you needed or what you thought you were missing as a child, and kind of doing that work as an adult, taking yourself through that healing process. We'll jump right into that, and kind of first and foremost, where I'd like to start is kind of towards the end of our conversation last time, on our last call, with why I said, hey, no, like, I have secure attachment, right? Like, I felt like I was safe. I felt like I was loved. I felt like I was seen. And even though that is a spectrum, right, secure attachment is generally means that you had parents that were predictable, that were responsive, and that were attuned to your emotions. And so, kind of going off of that's what secure attachment is. I'd love to go and talk through everybody, like, okay, like, do you feel those things, right? Did you feel that mom was predictable? Did you feel that she was, since mom's here and we can talk about it, that she feel like she was attuned to your emotions? And so Liz, I guess starting with you, something we didn't talk about last time, where, if you have done the work to figure out what type of attachment you have, what is it, and how do you best reflect that it got to there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm still a beginner at this, so I'll just say where I'm at. But I feel like a huge part of that was that, like, dad left when I was 2, and mom then had to become the sole parent. So it's almost impossible, I feel like, for one parent to do the job of what two could. So it's like she's trying to work and like pay attention to, making sure that we have, it is kind of funny with you saying next.
Yeah, it is funny. Liz is in town for the holidays. It's right after Christmas, so I love that she's at my house for the week.
But yeah, it just seems like because when I look back at it, I don't feel like I had like that attunement and that support all the time, because it was like impossible. I mean, dad wasn't there, and she was really focused on like working a lot and like making sure that we had a house and food and like our basic necessities, right? So it's like when you have 5 children that you're doing that for, I understand that you can't really, do some of those other things. And so that was like majority of my life was that. So I feel like it is a bit easier when you have 2 parents.
Yeah.
Right? Like one maybe is focusing on that, and one can maybe kind of come in and do a little bit more of that attunement, or, hey, I don't have the energy for this right now. Can you kind of step in and do this? Or, it's like this tag team. And when you have one parent that's doing that, and then being with dad, like same kind of thing. It's like, I don't feel that he was in a place to be able to do some of those things, or even like conscious and aware of that. And I think probably a lot of parents at that time weren't, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like it was, obviously this is a thing that is new, pretty new. Like a lot of people didn't talk about it until like the last 10 years or so. Yeah, so for me, I feel like I tend to have, well, I actually realized this, but I feel like I have anxious attachment with men and avoidant attachment with women. But I'm sure there is some secure attachment in there. I just don't really, I haven't done enough work on it to like understand those. But I feel like when I read anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, I'm like, oh yeah, I tend to be this way with men and this way with women, and it's kind of different for each side.
Kind of, I don't know if you guys knew this, but kind of like how the secure attachment, it started with research in like toddlers, like I think babies up to 18 months. And it was how they determined secure attachment was like the mother would leave the room, and when the mother came back, it was like how the baby responded to the mother returning. And it's like that, like all the research, right? Like that was the research. I don't know if that was, I think that it was either in the early 2000s or in the 90s, but like, right. So now it's gone far beyond that, I think is kind of how we're talking about it. To me, Liz, that makes sense. And so I guess kind of talking through that, and, you know, Ben, you might feel similar, but so when I think of predictable, right? I think that when I think of our home, even after Dad was gone, like, yeah, Mom wasn't around all the time, and so we did have a sense of freedom. But I feel like it was predictable, right? Like, Mom was strict, and, you know, granted, I guess, Liz, you know, we're 9 years apart, and so, right, by the time I was 18, you were still only 9, and so you went through all your teenage years where I wasn't there, and so I don't know. The only perspective I have, right, is like the single parent through my teenage years. I still felt like it was predictable because Mom was strict, and so
Well, and
I
I
don't
think
know.
I think we had a routine. I think our
Yeah,
life was pretty routined, don't you think? Like we had the schedule, we ate dinner together. I tucked Ben and Liz in to go to sleep at night, and we read books and sang songs. I mean, those things happened every day. We did homework, we did dishes, you guys had chores. There were, a chart of everybody's, chores. So
yeah.
What are some symptoms of the different types of attachments?
It's mainly in your relationships with the opposite sex is where it comes out the most. So like when Liz is, you know, saying that she has like anxious attachment with men, there's that insecurity there. And that's where it kind of comes back into reparenting, right? Because it is like the stuff that you didn't have, that were holes, like that's the stuff that you're seeking to repair now.
So,
And so,
well, anxious attachment style said, like, I just looked it up, like fear of abandonment and rejection, difficulty trusting others, yep, needing constant reassurance, yep, low self-esteem, difficulty being alone, no, people-pleasing behavior, preoccupation with how others think and feel about you is anxious attachment.
so being human,
Yeah, I think it's more just when it affects, like, I think everyone has those at some point, but when
yeah,
it's happening all the time, right? Or like more often, and it's hard for you to enter a relationship because of those things, I think is when it affects
yeah,
you, right? And even then, you still can. A lot of people do, right? You enter relationships and you know that you maybe have a tendency towards, I mean, I talk to friends about that a lot, where you enter a relationship knowing that, and it's helpful to even know that, right? To just like understand, I have a tendency towards these certain behaviors, and even like talking to your partner about that and understanding that that influences the relationship quite a bit.
so kind of going on from there, you know, Ben, you know, I think you've done a lot of work on yourself in a variety of fashions through therapy, coaching, medicinal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like where do you think your attachment lies? You know, and I'm thinking it more in the terms of, right, like emotional attunement, predictability, and then what was the other one? The other one was like the third category is responsiveness, right? And so would you be able to define your attachment style? If not, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a mix because it's like, I mean, I'm not an expert on attachment styles, but I know it's like I think, right, is like, again, it's like a spectrum. So you can have like Liz was
Yeah.
saying, is like, she was like, oh yes, this, that's me, that's me. Um, but it's like, so for me, typically I would describe myself as anxious because it's like, so one way that I've always resonated with that is like, when there's a problem, I want to fix it right away. So it's like, and I've always viewed that as a good thing, but that comes from a fear-based place too. Of like, I need to control this and I need to fix it right now or else I'm unsafe, is where that comes from. So that definitely comes from childhood too, of like, um, trying to make mom feel better. And that it's just like, it's part of my personality, but also again, yeah, it's based on like how I just responded to my environment. So it's like trying to fix things around me so I feel safe instead of just, so that creates that anxiousness or that anxiety. But at the same time, like it can be avoidant in a way too of like the fear of going like deeper, like with in romantic partnerships. It's it's like I mean the same thing kind of even has happened in anxious relationships. I journaled about this the other day of like when we try and like define something quickly so we don't go too deep into it and then we're like hurt in the process. So it's like I would define myself as more anxious, but I think I have like I think we're all avoidant. We're all avoiding something, but generally speaking, I would say I'm more anxious. Like because I'm
Okay.
anticipating things more, which works to my
Okay.
benefit, right? I anticipate things. But like Belle, she's more avoidant. So we've attracted each other for that reason, right? To help each other heal, right? Like I remember when we were first dating, like it was the complete opposite. I was like, let's talk about this right now and fix it because I'm uncomfortable. And then she's like, I don't want to talk about this because I'm uncomfortable. Right. And then like she would literally like go silent. Like she like physically could not talk about it. And now it's much different on both parties, right? Like I don't need to like hurry and try and figure it out in this moment. And she's more willing to discuss things in the moment too if needed.
Yeah. So you kind of talked about, right, like part of this is just your nature, right? And we talked about nature versus nurture. So I mean, I guess from an older sibling's perspective, and forgive me for I'm directing most of this at like Ben and Liz because I feel like last time we spoke about the divorce, it was mostly like Jared, Heather, and me. Like we talked most of the time, and so now I'm like, oh, I want to hear more perspective from Ben and Liz, and so like talk to me or tell me more about like how did you feel about your childhood, right? Like did you feel loved? What pressures did you feel? What security did you or did you not feel? And when and why did you feel that way?
Good question, Josh. Thanks for asking. And it's interesting that you even bring this up, right? It's because like from the work that I've done, like I want attention so badly, and I also am terrified of it. And that's usually how we work, right? We like fear and desire are the two sides of the same coin. Because I am one of the younger siblings. Me and Liz are the younger siblings of five. Like even like I notice like during the holidays, like being around more people, it reminds me more of like my childhood. And it was like my voice naturally got drowned out because, and that's again, right? Like nature versus nurture. Like I'm naturally just a chill, more introverted than extroverted person. So it's like I'm naturally going to be the observer. That's who I am. But at the same time, there was things that I wanted to say. So it was like knowing myself now, right? Is yeah, like I think things could have been done differently. But like Liz said, it's like we didn't have that capacity, but at the same, we didn't have that knowledge. Like we didn't have the awareness to do it. So it's not blame, but I've gone through that phase too. I remember mom, you sent a message, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, whenever it was. And I think that's kind of like what started this podcast, right? About you sent this long voice note. Do you remember that?
Yeah, so it was more about value, like how
Value.
we understand our value, and that I had realized that about myself, that my value largely came from proving myself. So I'm a youngest child and always had these older people around me kind of telling me what to do, who to be, how to act. And so, of course, it's natural that I would, continue that with the next generation. And Ben, you shared that in our first podcast about, getting rewards, right, for certain behavior. I think all of you relate to that, and punishment for unwanted behavior. And for me, the value, I was actually doing your membership, Ben, and you had said something in the membership that also coincided with some other work I was doing in my writing. And it just hit me one day about the value I'd placed on myself, and then again done it to my children for needing that approval to equate I have value instead of just our innate value as a child of God. I am that already. I don't need to do anything to prove my value and divine worth.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that perfectly ties in, thank you, Mom, of like what I felt as a kid. There was a version of predictability, but I definitely was like anxious, right? Kind of like walking on eggshells, like not wanting to make Mom upset. And like even in this moment of like everyone listening and talking to me, like I can do this easily, like in a work setting, but like in this more family circumstance, like when I first started talking, I can feel like my heart rate go up, and like I start to sweat a little bit more. So
why? Like, I mean, you said that, right? Like you have something to say.
yeah, deep down, like when people were saying, and I know Jared can relate to this. I wonder if anyone else can. But like, when you feel like you have a special calling or purpose, right? And like I always was called Ben, your special boy, whatever, right? So I think like the feeling that people felt was what Mom was just describing, right? Of just like, whoa, like you have this presence that we can't describe, but we have to assign meaning to it. And you're going to be a great church leader and you're here to achieve great things. So that has, pros and cons. It has the fear of punishment and also like the reward to it. And that's definitely something I've been separating from. Just like it's brought me a lot of success, and it's also brought me a lot of confusion and emptiness in that same moment and at the same time.
Just to make sure I understand it correctly. So you're saying, right? So at a young age, right? Like I think it was recognized that you were like an old soul.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's something that I think everybody recognized about you. And I think, like from a religious perspective, right? Like you wanted to do the right things religiously, right? Like you studied scriptures at a young age regularly, which, I remember I was thinking like, geez, what a weird thing like this, but like also impressed, like, wow, like this he's living up to the expectations that have been assigned to him for whatever reason. And so like, that's what you're talking about is you felt these expectations, some spoken, some unspoken, and that added a layer of pressure that shaped how you lived your youth.
Absolutely. And my adulthood. Like it's still like my identity is wrapped into that. So you have to even look at my career, like what do I do for a living? I help people, right? So it's like, yeah, it's part of me. Like I believe that's who I am. But then the whatever you want to call it, the wound or the shadow or the fear or the ego side of it is that like if I don't do that, then I have no value. Then I don't exist, right? I don't matter. So it's like I literally have to like keep that up or it feels like I'm worthless or nothing.
And I want to say in here too, I just had a cute memory of you, Ben, like thinking of you like as a rapper, right? How you just you were so exhilarated on stage. Yeah. And I saw you it was like this blossoming on stage because like you said, more, in your natural day to day, you're more introverted and quiet. So I'm curious about that. And if you can even remember, like when you were 4 and 5 years old, and during our church meetings, we would, sometimes pass the microphone down the pew and people would share their testimonies, and you would take the microphone and very enthusiastically speak into it. And it was very touching, and it wasn't like a lot of young children kind of how they would do it. I mean, you certainly had a voice and a conviction about it. So I wonder if, because you were so young and did that so naturally, and then I just kind of want to contrast that with how you felt on stage and tell me kind of what comes up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I just got chills as you said that. Like I've thought about that, and it's cool to think about that feeling. And I think that goes back to even like the reparenting thing, right? So it's like I watched my son Kingston, like he naturally like he got a microphone for Christmas. Like that's all, like he just grabs it and just goes just like sings his own song. Like oh, it's actually super cute on this note. Like I almost started crying because yesterday morning he woke up and he just started singing in his crib, Rise, 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 which for all the listeners is
So
one of the rap
cute.
songs. And I was just like, oh my God. I was just sitting there listening. He's like, Daddy, come. And he's like, Rise. This is you. Rise. Right.
That's awesome.
And so just like that and like how he's naturally gravitated toward that. So it's like for me, yeah, it's like reparent. It's like, okay, how would I want to be reparented is like natural, like honoring that, but not putting pressure on it. You know, like he just naturally is. So it's this balance of like, yes, I want to help you encourage that and nurture that. But at the same time, like I have to check myself too of like, oh, this would be really cool if I could have like a rock star son who could fulfill my own like dreams that weren't fully lived. You know, like which we all like, there's all those parents and dads like who live vicariously through their like athlete kids or whatever. And so it's checking that. But so yeah, it's like this mix. Like I don't have it fully figured out, but yeah, it's like it's this weird thing of like I know that's who I am, or that's part of who I like am here to do and to learn. But yeah, it's like, you know, what I tell clients all the time is that, you know, what you're scared of is simultaneously what you love. Like it's what you care about the most.
And
So
you know, back to this, if I can just have you talk about this a little bit too with King and yourself, how like when he's doing these things, right? I mean, he's almost 2.5 and he speaks very well. He expresses himself very well. And even, you know, watching him, he picks up on your energy and excitement and how you respond to him.
Yeah.
Because it is impossible not to have that reaction because he's just so dang cute as of, you know, which is how I thought of all of you and all of my grandchildren. So even if we don't say anything with words, children are going to pick up on our approval and
For
our
sure.
disapproval. And so when you say you have to check yourself, I'm like, part of me goes, well, yeah, I kind of understand that. So he's not doing it to please you. Like, what is the difference between, you know, like being excited for him, right? And being in the moment with him
Yeah.
and supporting that moment and that dream and not having him do it to please. You know, it seems like that is so hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I mean, I think this all ties in, even though this is kind of adjacent. Like Josh sent me a message for my birthday talking about, you know, to be present and to be in the moment. And that's definitely, and like, I've spent a long time, like the past month, like really feeling into 2025 goals and like intentions. And it's like surprisingly it has taken me a long time to like get really clear. But like within that, right, is like joy in the process, which is just obviously like such a thing that we all hear about. So like with myself or parenting myself, like, hey, it's just not the goal, because we all know the story of like if we're outsourcing our happiness or joy or fulfillment or contentment to, oh, if I achieve this, then I will feel blank. Whether it's money, achievement, relationships, whatever, status. So it's like, okay, like how can I fully immerse myself into the process and enjoy it? And I think I have done that a lot, but I think like it's easy to as an adult to get outside of that. And for King, like he doesn't know it, like he really is in it for the enjoyment of the now. You know, he doesn't have a label of I need to do this. I mean, of course he is, like you said, Mom, like there's of course a psychological component, like he feels approved and like celebrated and loved when he's doing it. But like my intention is to you have him enjoy the process of the creation and being in that moment and not necessarily the outcome. So it's like you don't need to be anything. Like if you just want to create music just because you want to, awesome. If you just want to sing, like if you don't want to do anything to do with it, just like, being a guide for him on the journey of that discovery of whatever that looks like for him.
And I just had a little aha as you were saying that is, I think it's also being able to celebrate them even when you disapprove,
Yeah.
which is so challenging as a parent, right? Being able to help them feel loved and supported and celebrated, even when we are disappointed. I mean, to me, that is the greatest challenge as a parent. So maybe my earlier question is not the most important question, right? How, like, if he feels your joy and your approval when he's doing those things, maybe the better question, the more important question is, does he feel, and for all of us, right? And I think it goes back to the reparenting, how can we feel valued, celebrated, like we are a divine being that matters, that we're here to do and add, of course, important things to the world, which does require us to do things and have actions, So what do you think about that side of it? Kind of, it's
Yeah.
also the side of the love and the celebration when things aren't going well.
Yeah, so they've done studies on this. Like, so I completely agree of like, again, it's part of the process, right? It's like detaching from the result. And like for me, that honestly is difficult because it's like, of course, I want a good result. Like, that's like a real world reality thing. So it's like, how can I bring both these in together? But they've done studies on this. Andrew Huberman, the podcast, I have heard him talk about it. I forgot that they've done studies, but like, if you celebrate the effort and not the result, like they've done studies on like kids, like for example, if they get a 90, like if they get an A on a test and you celebrate, hey, like you got an A, good job, versus, wow, good effort, like you gave your best, like what will happen is like that the person who is getting the good effort will like over time outperform the person who's getting celebrated based on the result because they're getting celebrated for the effort. So like even like he got a football for Christmas and like he's definitely getting more like in his body in that way, and it's like been really fun to like throw him the football. Like I haven't been impressed. I'm like, dang dude, you can just like catch this thing like no problem. But like even like when he catches it and like he dives for the ball, like I'll say like, dude, like that was a good effort. Like I love how you went for it. Instead of just like good catch where it's like binary. Like good job if you caught it and then if you didn't, sorry, right? So that's definitely, yeah, going back to the parenting of like learning how to do that for myself because it definitely is like it feels like a do or die type of thing. And it's this definitely this vicious cycle. Like if I'm anything less than great, then I feel less than, if that makes sense. So it's like again, reparenting myself to like enjoy the process and celebrate the effort, which sounds so cheesy and corny, like to part of myself. But I know it's like important, and I know even like this season, like in the holidays as it slows down, it's definitely more challenging for me to not like because I want to like do something to like to feel good about myself. Admitting to myself that like I'm not where I want to be, and that's okay, and really like accepting that because I know it's like it's a journey to get there, and like I'm still gonna hold myself accountable, and like I want to achieve those things, but like loving and accepting myself in the now is a practice I've been in the process of.
Just want to add I mean, a lot of things, but specifically, I feel like you did a lot of work around fear. And one thing that I appreciate is that you did just do things like over and over again. You weren't afraid to fail. You just would like ask people like, to do a podcast, right? Like all, you would just like go out of your comfort zone to make connections and all sorts of things happen. And whether or not it worked, whatever that definition is of that working, the fact that you could just be in that process of asking without knowing and just really like failing faster, right? I think like that to me is also what is like worth celebrating more than whatever the achievement is at the end of it, is just being able to like show up even in your awkward moments or whatever it is, and just like doing that, because that's like the human part, right? It's not necessarily the end goal, even though that's fun, but that really only lasts like a very small percentage compared to like the rest of the journeys that we're all on.
I love that, Heather. And that is such a beautiful point, because another thing I saw about Ben that I even was like, wow, I'm so impressed that he would keep doing this. When you worked at a finance company here in Salt Lake, Ben, or early in your career when you were in college, and you kept going for promotions, and they weren't happening. And I remember they did eventually, but I remember watching you and thinking, how does he just keep doing it? And he doesn't seem at all discouraged. And I think that's what Heather is saying too, is just for all of us to be able to celebrate. And you kind of said this, Ben, in the journey, right? That we're going for it, but it's going to not always turn out, there's like this spectrum of beginning, middle, end. And then when we get to that end, we want to do something else, right? And there's the beginning, middle, end. So I'd love to hear any of you and all of you speak to that.
And to tie that back to our subject of attachment, I mean, to me, that feels like a very safe attachment to be able to do that, to be able to not have a debilitating fear, to have a healthy amount of fear, right? A healthy amount of fear that you're able to overcome and do those things. Yeah, I mean, that feels very healthy.
Well, thank
And
you.
Jared, I think for Jared too, I mean, you've been able to do that with your career. In film, you think about starting out and just going after it and talking to people and, willing to do it before you had it perfected,
Yeah, and Ben can probably identify with this too. I mean, I think a lot of that is, also being young, right? And not totally understanding, like,
Yep.
now having kids and a mortgage, it feels much different, and that's something that I've thought about in the last couple of years. Is like, it's funny. I would love to be in the place that Ben is talking about, where, doing that self work, and I have done some, but I think a lot of the quantifiable aspects for me of that is, I guess, specifically, in relationships with spouse and children and career. And a phase that I'm in right now is honestly like not caring about my career as much.
One of the insecurities that I have, and this is me about to take this space for my insecurity, is like, I want to be an expert, and I always am fear, like not talking about something that I don't know about, or having people judge me based off that. So the statement I'm about to make is compensating for that insecurity of, like, we're talking about like attachment, reparenting, and all that stuff. And like, anybody who's studied that is gonna be like, these guys are using it all wrong. And so I just want to make that statement of like, hey, like, we're not experts, and we may use terms incorrectly and going back and forth. So Ben, you talked about your childhood of saying, okay, like, where I understand it was lacking is you were feeling anxious because you were putting, and this might not be phrased correctly, but you felt pressure to not disappoint mom, and
Or religious leaders,
or religious leaders, right? So
Or just God. You could say
God,
like
yeah.
I view
Okay.
it as that, like doing the deeper work now, like as a kid, right? It's like now I can view as an adult. It's like, oh, it's like I don't want to let God down.
Okay. So as you have now tried to like do that work, it's okay. So what were you lacking as a child saying, oh, like I didn't need to feel that disappointment. That was an unnecessary guilt that I felt. And so how do you replace that guilt or correct that space? And then how are you going to do that as a parent to make sure or to do your best so that your child doesn't feel unnecessary guilt or responsibility of expectations like that?
Yeah, a few things. One, I totally relate to the expert thing. And I think one that just like that we're, and I relate to that, Josh. And it's like so many other people feel that, but I think this conversation can hopefully give people permission because so many people feel the same thing, right? I need to be an expert. And that's one of been the beautiful gifts as a parent or whatever you want to call like conscious parenting is that like as I parent Kingston, I'm reparenting myself and vice versa. It's like this because it's as I get triggered, I know that's revealing a part of me that feels unsafe, that I have an opportunity to now love and to reparent with myself, and then I can do it for him too. So it's like this incredible motivation to like it is like I know I'm not going to get it perfect, and that's part of the repair, right? That I've definitely had to learn because I definitely have like you mentioned like this pressure to be perfect, this pressure to perform, not to let mom down or God down or whatever, right? Like this perfectionism, like I will only be loved if I do these things. And so it's again, like just like, yeah, for being a child of God. Literally, like when I first saw Kingston being born, like I had no expectation of how for him to live life. Like literally just his being like was euphoric and like that was enough. And so to constantly remind myself of like, oh, like, yeah, like I am truly enough for being here. And that releases the pressure to like be who I am, which I think has to do with holding the microphone and getting on stage and like using my voice. But it's not attaching it to necessarily an outcome. It's just who I am. So it's not necessarily what I do, like it's who I be, and that influences the doing instead of vice versa. And so it's tapping into that first, and then that energy will, produce more. I'm coming from love instead of fear. So that's the goal for me. The intention. And as a parent, as I reparent myself and my son and future kids.
I don't think mom consciously chose, right, to put any pressure on you, and I don't think mom she would reflect like, no, like you could have done whatever and I would have loved you, and it wouldn't have mattered. And so like it is a meta question of like you can't see what you can't see as you parent your son and your future children of like, okay, and this kind of gets for everybody, right? Like how do we try and have this like transparency of we all felt something that we were missing in our youth. As you try and correct that can probably create other curtains that will be placed over our children that we don't intend to. And I think the only thing, and that's where I think we go back to the repair. Like that is why it's the most important, because as we consciously, or not consciously, but as we are aware of where we mess up, we have to say sorry, because there's going to be so many places where we mess up that we don't know. And so that when our children are older and they recognize, oh, like I didn't like how I was parented in this situation, they will already feel, oh, but my dad and my mom, they always told me that like when they messed up, so they must not have known this. Or will it go the other way? Like, why didn't they say sorry for that? Right? Like, I don't know.
Like, I didn't tell you, sorry that I messed up. I think that was a really hard thing for me. And it still is. I think I'm better at it. I'm getting better, but it still is a hard thing. And I want to also insert here that when you said you don't think I intentionally I do acknowledge, I do feel disapproval, right? And so even now, I will feel disapproval and you will feel it from me. And it's hard for me sometimes not to say anything. Can you all agree to that? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a hard thing for me. I have high expectations of myself too. So I'm constantly disapproving of myself. So I think in doing this podcast and sharing it publicly, I love so much that we're having these conversations with ourselves. And I want to also just say that kind of what Josh said, we're not experts in any of these things. We decided to share our journey because we are learning together. And I think that is the beautiful thing in relationships. If you can have conversations and learn together with the people you love, whether it's friends, family, your marriage partner, your committed partner in your work. I think it's very, very important to be able to do this together. It's not always easy. And I just want to say that I am still learning these things, and it's difficult. It's difficult when I feel disapproval to not show it in my behavior or even verbally.
I just want to come back. I think it'd be a really important part for you, Mom, because why to understand why you had a hard time apologizing is not only going to help us, it's going to help so many other parents, because that's that same a thing. Like, you can't admit that you're wrong because then you receive that shame and guilt and disapproval.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes. So I felt a need to really prove myself, which I alluded to earlier. And part of that, I think, in doing my own work was because I was the youngest child. There was an 8-year gap between me and my closest sibling. I had all these people telling me what to do. And I wanted my voice. I wanted to have my place and my say. So I have, I think just naturally defended myself, like Heather and I were talking the other day about how I've been really strong with my boundaries. I've been strong with my opinions and my beliefs, and that has served me well in many areas. In other areas, it has not.
Well, and even with your kids. So I'm curious. So with us, what would it mean? If you have to apologize, does that mean you're wrong, or what does it mean?
I can't do that. If I cry, I had this fear that I would fall apart. I saw that emotion as a weakness from my childhood, certain, childhood experiences. I saw crying and kind of certain behaviors as a weakness. So I think that's a piece of it as a weakness where I thought I have to stay strong.
If I can jump in, my experience parenting and how I was parented, my instinct is to be the authority, right? Is to go straight into oh, this is how it is just because this is what I think and I'm the parent, and I think that's how most of us were parented by you.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to have a partner that for the most part wasn't parented that way, and so we have very different instincts of how we're to parent.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to learn how to not be that way, and most of my repairing is saying oh, sorry I yelled, or sorry I told you that's how it has to be, because that's not how it is. You're allowed to have your own opinion. It's interesting to me, as our kids get older, now they're very experienced with that, and they, even if we get mad at them, from a more authoritarian point of view, they don't even take it seriously, because they have been apologized to enough and have their own space. That, to me, we're entering a new phase, as they get older, preteens and teenagers. It's just interesting how it's now it's always a negotiation, and I'm starting to look forward to that next phase of parenting, and I have for a while, of where, I don't know, it's a more equal relationship or something.
Yeah, and I have to say, I really, as your children grow, I mean, I appreciate their ability to communicate, right? in a way that I feel like is not the norm for a lot of children that are raised by authoritarian parents or an authoritative parent. So, I think that is a much healthier way to be able to like negotiate or help them have a voice, right? That's what I so wanted. I didn't feel like I had a voice growing up. And so then the pendulum swung, instead of saying, oh, I want to do that for my kids, what I didn't have, I took it on because I wanted it for myself.
Right. You exercised your own voice
Yes.
upon us.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. And I appreciate you sharing, Mom, because like that's what's happening with a lot of parents is like because that's what the ego loves is power and control. So it's like if I can assert that on someone, that feels really good. And so it's like, and then yeah, like why would you apologize? That's like it's anti like power and control. So just like for people to understand like the psychological benefit of why you're probably not apologizing and why it feels so scary.
So Ben talked about, right, like that fear of disappointment. And you didn't really talk about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
like what was your, what did you feel pressure from Mom, or did you just feel like kind of alone and not, like what was it that you felt as you reflect on your childhood?
How perfect you're sitting right next to her. This is on purpose.
Gosh, I feel like every episode I'm just gonna cry. Yeah, to be honest, it's actually like kind of hard for me to have these conversations because so yeah, like at that point, it felt like during that childhood phase, it was just Ben and I. So for me, it felt like I couldn't do anything right. So I think I kind of adopted this attitude of F it. Like if I can't do anything right, then like whatever. Like what's the point of trying? Or like what's the point of like trying to get approval when like I feel like when I do try, I don't get it. So for me it was more that. And then it was like, and I can totally understand why Ben would feel that like need to kind of keep things, because there with my mom and I there was a lot of tension and a lot of arguing, and that came from a place of like really not feeling safe to actually like communicate vulnerably and how I really felt. So it was like I just acted out because I was so frustrated because I felt like I couldn't actually communicate what I really wanted to and get the response that I felt that I needed. So for me, it felt, yeah, I feel like even though we grew up in the same house, it was a very different experience for both of us.
And so, and I acknowledge that. And I know those moments, and I know the things I did to trigger that. And I'm sorry. And I do want to know if you feel like some aspect of that is still true now, even though we've had conversations. I feel like there are still things that you feel like you can't say.
I mean, it's definitely gotten better, I feel like. And even like you said of like apologizing, I feel like you do that a lot more. Because I can remember the one time that you did when I was a child. And it wasn't to my face, it was in a note. And I remember it because it was significant and that felt good, right? In that moment, I was like, wow, one time. And so even saying that, I'm like, oh, that's interesting because it's like the things you don't think of like when I become a parent, like if we don't have this conversation, I don't think I would even think of apologizing as like such a significant thing. But yeah, I feel like I became, and I think Ben and I are maybe similar in this, where I feel very aware of my surroundings, and kind of for that same reason, I felt like I was just trying to make sure that I didn't get in trouble as much as possible, and yeah, that I just do the best I can, and then if I, couldn't do good enough, then it was just like I felt like that's when I would explode or slam my door shut. And I do feel like I'm more open, and but there of course is still this protection that I have where I'm like, I still don't feel totally safe. But I think, that can happen over time, hopefully. But yeah, I felt unsafe generally. And yeah, that was my experience.
It's interesting to compare those attachments, right, of Ben and Liz, of Ben, having a lot of approval, but also expectation, and how that led to a certain type of attachment, and then kind of you being next to that, like not necessarily being disapproved of, but just being witness to Ben's like holy one, like,
Yes.
like, I mean,
Well, never feeling good enough.
well, yeah, not having the expectation, and like what I'm hearing as I'm listening is there's something nice about that too, right? Is like that you don't have that pressure necessarily that Ben had. I mean, obviously you have like other things as a result, with the same way that we all do, but like it's just interesting comparing the offsets that those take.
Totally, like the positives, because yeah, absolutely. I feel like I don't have that same pressure on myself, which is really nice. Like even Ben talks about that side of him being good and like serving him and not serving him in certain ways, and I feel like that's the same for me, right? Like I feel like for him, he wants to do those things. Like I don't feel like I need to do that to prove myself. Like I feel like when I do something, it's because I really want to. But I do have that side that's like, I feel like not good enough, or not, like it's harder for me to take action, whereas I feel like Ben can do that easier. It's like harder for me to feel like I'm able to, because I don't have that just like in me. And so it's the two sides of the different coin. It's like harder for me to take action, but I feel like when I do, I won't feel that pressure of I need to do it for other people to like approve of me. It's because I really feel like I desire it.
No, Ben was trying to meet the expectations where Liz felt like she had no expectations. And so like, right, like they're both about approval.
Well,
Well,
I
Liz
felt
is
like I couldn't meet, like there was no, and I think that with having Ben, it enhanced that, right? Of like, there is no way I can become this like perfect, sweet boy.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, but Ben received a lot of adulation
yes,
and approval. I mean, justified and unjustified. I mean, was a great kid, but he wasn't that great.
Pretty good.
I mean, I have to say too, as I'm listening to Liz talk, I know I was harder on my girls than my boys.
Well, that's what I want to get to, right?
Yeah.
Because I do feel like Ben had like, so anyone, and I don't know if I just haven't got to this point yet, but I feel like Jared has some sort of approval that he was searching for or felt. Liz felt like she couldn't get that approval no matter what she did. Ben was trying to live up to the approval, and I'm curious if Heather has that, because I don't feel I don't feel like I battled that as a child. And anyways, that's neither here nor there. What I do want to talk about, what mom just said, of saying, because I've heard Heather and Liz both say this, that they felt that they were parented different than Jared, Ben, and I. And I know that could be a whole nother podcast.
It's cool, just like I like how these conversations naturally lead us to the next thing. And that was, thank you, Liz and Mom, for sharing that. Like, that's like what the world needs is actually like less like experts, right? And people, regular people doing it in real time, because that's actually leading by example.
That is such a great point.
Well, it's
Yeah.
literally the exact thing we're talking about. Is like you have to do it in this certain way. It's like, no, like literally, it's like we're in the process.
You just have to start, right? You just have to start having the conversations.
Yeah, like I mean, obviously, like what Liz said is like we're not all of a sudden just like I have no fear of disapproval from you, Mom, right? It's, just, it's not just like a snap of the fingers, but it's slowly and surely.
And to go back and to go to repairing parenting podcast, and people that you follow will say, like, it's never too late. You can never, you can't do it too much. I mean, maybe you can, but like, you come back 30 years later and mom said sorry, and I know that there was a sense of, not everything's better now, but even though that sorry is not 30, but 20 years later, it still carries a lot of weight and it has a lot of healing, even 20 years later. And I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, that's really cool. An example for both kids and parents.
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging that, Josh. That there is never too late to say you're sorry.
I recently had a client, he's 76, and his main thing, I'll be honest, it was the hardest. It was the most challenging because 76 years of programming is a real freaking thing. It's a real B, I'll tell you what. But it's like, because like when you're working with like 20 something or 30 something or 40 something, it's like, yeah, there can still be some stuff, but 76. But it was really cool. Like basically what he wanted is like a healthy relationship with his daughters, and he got it. And basically what he had to do, what's happening now, right, is like repairing and take responsibility. But based on like he has a pretty wild childhood. Like it was like he was so scared to like apologize, but it's just cool to see like the exact thing that you're afraid to do is gonna heal it. So it's just really cool to see like yeah, like his relationship with his family has like 180'd.
It's like in Home Alone, the like old guy that didn't want to apologize to his son. Like the one really good message. And
There was several good messages in that movie.
Yeah, and like I mean, I'll leave it at there's even Kevin. What's his name? What's the shovel guy's name, Jared?
South Bend Slayer, is that what it is?
I don't know, but like what his representation, right, is like Kevin's fear. And like once he goes up to him in the church and embraces it, and then like it becomes his ally instead of the thing that he's avoiding. So, Home Alone, thank you.
So that character was not in the original script. They added him to add the heartwarming effect to the movie.
That's a good move.